Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to take a little time today to really spend some time talking about how AI shapes national security and cyber defense. I decided to switch things up. So at most conferences, thank you comes at the end. Everyone's ready to go. And so I decided today to just start by saying thank you. So thank you for having me here first. And this is the 16th international conference that you've had. And I understand that it's gotten so big that you've had to change venues. And that's a testament, I think, to how important this is for collaborating and sharing information. And right now, we really are at a critical juncture in national security and AI and cyber defense. So it's a really great time for all of us to be here together. So thank you for that. Today, I'm going to talk about three things, basically. I'm going to talk about cyber attacks in general. I'm going to talk about AI as it's used by cyber attackers and as it's used by defenders. And then I'm going to talk about how we can collaborate together. Now, when I start talking about cyber attacks, I'm going to start at a very high level. I'll talk a little bit about threat intelligence. Please know that this is not a threat intelligence brief. There are people that are far more dedicated and diligent on my team that do a much better job in this space. But I want to use that threat intelligence as some examples for you. And then when I move to AI, I want to be certain that we're talking very clearly about what we're doing and what I hope we're going to be able to do together. And I will save some time for questions, so please make sure you have them ready at the end. So, cyber attacks today. I think you'll hear from every single person that gets on this stage that things are happening faster, that the actors are more sophisticated, that we really are seeing an increase in the number of cyber attacks. So if you look at this slide, if you did actually read it, in the time it took you to read the first sentence, we had over 7,000 individual password attacks at Microsoft. And if you kept reading, then you know that a bot also tried to defeat multi-factor authentication. So we have technology that's being used in these attacks. It's important, though, to understand how we track our threat actors. So if anybody's been following Microsoft for some time, you would know that we've been tracking threat actors for many, many years. And about a year ago, we realized we had a problem. We used to track our nation-state threat actors according to the elements of the periodic table. And we realized we were about to run out of elements. That is not a good problem to have. But we also had a different problem as well. It used to be that as a company, we thought we only needed to track those sophisticated nation-state actors. That's actually not the case. We had a much broader group of threat actors that we needed to be tracking. So we needed to come up with a new way to do that threat actor tracking. So you'll see from this slide that now we are not using the periodic table anymore. We have decided to use weather as one way of tracking these actors. So we're currently tracking approximately 300 different threat actors. 160 of those are nation-state actors. About 50 are ransomware or financially motivated cyber criminals. We are also tracking cyber mercenaries or private sector offensive actors and those engaged in cyber influence operations. We are starting to see, in some cases, an overlap between each of these, which makes the tracking even more important. Today, as I talk a little bit about threat actors, I'll focus mostly on Russia, so on our blizzards, which have then an identifier in front when we can really get to attribution. And before I move on from this slide, there's one other piece. You'll notice there's an entire category there called storms. Storms are basically groups that we believe are affiliated. And when we look at indicators of a compromise, we believe at some point we will be able to advance them and have appropriate attribution to show that they are a nation-state actor or an influence actor. And at that point, when we believe we have that confirmed appropriate attribution, then we will move them into the right category. So basically, a storm is something we believe we are close to having appropriate attribution on. In addition to thinking about threat actors, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing is focusing on the victims. So we have victims all over the world. We saw state-sponsored attacks in 120 countries in the last year. The activity was primarily reconnaissance, so initial access, and in some instances, data exfiltration. We had some good news, I think, and we saw a decrease in destructive attacks. Although one thing that I will say is that Russian actors and Iranian state-sponsored actors are still the actors that are most willing to engage in destructive attacks. We have seen high-volume attacks from many actors. And one other thing that I think is important is these are nation-state attacks. They are not limited to other nation-state actors. So these attacks are, in some cases, governmental, but they're also commercial, critical infrastructure, and other non-government organizations. One other thing to think about in this space, where we have espionage, where we have access, you also need to be concerned about persistence. So while we do not have current destructive attacks, if these actors are seeking to maintain persistence in the network, then there may be destructive attacks in the future. I'm going to spend a little time focusing on a specific nation-state actor. So we have Russian state-sponsored actors. And Russian state-sponsored actors, as I said, are categorized by our blizzard. What we've seen in this space is that they are expanding their scope well beyond Ukraine to Ukraine's allies. And they are incredibly focused on using a very diverse toolkit. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about Midnight Blizzard, which is one of the threatened actors that we track, and Star Blizzard. Both of those actors tend to use email attacks and phishing, other kind of common mechanisms. But we have seen Seashell Blizzard, which is actually diversified to incorporate ransomware attacks into their systems. And we have seen Forest Blizzard using more vulnerabilities as well. One of the things to note about this, you can see, is that 36% of intrusions were in NATO members' systems, and they are looking at diplomatic, defense, and transportation sectors. We are seeing a confluence of cyber attacks and influence campaigns, and they're really looking, especially in those influence operations, to capitalize on the anti-war sentiments in Europe. I can't talk about cyber attacks without influence operations. So at Microsoft, not only do we have Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, we also have the Microsoft Threat Analysis Center. And that center is specifically devoted to looking at the growing influence operation. So with over 1 billion people voting in 2024, you can imagine that there could be a massive impact to world governments where we have these influence. So nation-state actors are employing these influence operations. In May, our analysis center did a report, so it is online at this point. And what we saw initially is that Chinese-based actors are actually using polling mechanisms inside the US to understand the sentiment right now in advance of their influence operations. So they want to know where the weak spots are before they actually start a full barrage of influence operations ahead of the US elections. And really, we are looking at influence operations where they are seeking to sway and shift views, especially during high conflict times, such as times of war. And we are seeing more and more in the lead up to elections. In this space, we have already seen AI-generated content, and I think we will continue to see that content. One of the things that I think is good news about AI-generated content and influence operations, particularly in video and in still pictures, oftentimes crowdsourcings are able to identify that that picture is not legitimate. And it very quickly becomes apparent that it could not be real. And then that goes viral, and people know that they are unable to use that type of mechanism for influence operations. So we've talked about the threat. So you understand how we track threat actors. You understand at a high level, and I've given you some examples of the types of threat we are seeing, but I think it's important that we talk about how actors are using AI. So you can assume anytime that you have a new technology, as much as defenders are using it, attackers are using it as well. And so we released a report that we coordinated with OpenAI a while back, where we looked at, of the 300 threat actors that we are tracking, what type of attacks are we seeing? So I mentioned forest blizzard before, which is strontium, often known as when we was back in the periodic table. We've been tracking that Russian-based actor for years. And in fact, we have an open civil case against strontium since 2016. So we at Microsoft have been seizing domains that are used by that actor since 2016. But we have also started to see Forest Blizzard using AI. And what they're using it for right now is research. They're researching satellites, they're researching radar, and they're using it in ways substantially similar to the ways that we're using it. Another example of where we're seeing cyber actors use AI is in North Korea. So in Emerald Sleet, which is one of the actors that we track, we've seen North Korean actors using AI for reconnaissance as well, but also using the large language model to improve their social engineering, and they're using the large language model to do a better job in their phishing emails. So while we are not seeing a new vector in the attacks, we're seeing a use in the AI itself. So generally speaking, where do we see nation-state cyber threats? I think you'll see them, like I said, in the reconnaissance, so understanding victims better. We are actually also seeing it in coding assistance, so to improve software scripts and to develop effective malware. One of the good news things about that is that all of our blocking systems and other things are still working in this space. And then finally, the large language models, as I said in that example with North Korea, looking to improve their attack vector and their social engineering and other things. So we also decided we needed to make some I just want to actually step back. So I know that we talked a little bit about what the threat is. I always want to move from a threat to good news, right? And so before I get kind of where we are going in a principled way, I want to take 1 second and talk about what our advantage is. So I've talked to you about a threat. I've talked to you about how they're using it. The good news. I think the good news here for AI is that we have the advantage. So defenders, generally speaking, have more data. But it's not just actually about more data, it's about the quality of that data as well. So there are open source methods and there are large language model out there, but that may not necessarily have the quality of data that you need. The next thing we have is we have more compute power, so we have better infrastructure. Working in this space using AI, it's incredibly important to make sure you have the technological support. And at Microsoft, we've been committed for a long time in investing in that. And I think you've seen as well is that we're partnering with governments and with other private sector customers around the world to make sure that they have that infrastructure. And finally, because we have the better data source, because we have the infrastructure, I think we are seeing defenders innovating more and more. And that's really going to help the response in this space. How? How is it going to help? And the answer is, I think, in several different ways, but I decided to basically pick 4 because this is what we're seeing and what we're using at this point. And this is Microsoft's vantage point, but these bullet points, these 4, are from lots of other companies and lots of other AI advantage as well. So incident summarization. So we have 65 trillion signals at Microsoft that we're taking in every single day. And we are also comparing that to the 300 threat actors that I discussed that we're tracking. We need to have a way to be able to summarize that, and AI is able to help. We have an impact analysis, so that will allow you to look at security incidents, offer insights into affected systems, and really, I think, help incident responders prioritize. We are using it to reverse engineer scripts, and what I mean by that, it'll show us the indicators of compromise so that we can block them, so that we can share them, and in many cases, we are using this to be able to identify malicious infrastructure outside of Microsoft systems, so we can use that as well. In some cases, taking proactive action ourselves through our digital crimes unit. And I believe that AI will also allow us to do step-by-step actionable instructions and information that will assist incident responders. One thing I do want to just pause and point out and make sure that you noticed, at no point did I indicate that there wasn't a human involved in all of this work. So while we are using AI, it is to augment the capabilities of the humans that are working with us. So I talked about how we saw cyber attackers looking to use AI tools. One of the things that we've started to think about is, okay, we're tracking 300 actors. We know they're going to use AI, so now we need to be very principled about what we are going to do about it. So in February, we worked with OpenAI to share information. And we were able to do some identification. There are more threat actors in that February report than I discussed. But we also used it as an opportunity to say, okay, what are we going to do going forward? And so I think the first thing we decided is that where we see a known threat actor using Microsoft's AI services, we are committed to take appropriate action to disrupt that activity. The second thing that we decided is if we see a known threat actor using someone else's services, we are going to share that information and make sure that they are able to similarly take action. We are going to also collaborate with stakeholders and make sure we're regularly exchanging information about how we're seeing these threats. So the report we published in February will be something we will do consistently because transparency is incredibly important here. So we will be very transparent about the actions we take with respect to threat actors using AI. We had a lot of debate about this. I'll be honest with all of you here in this room. It's a big statement to say that you are going to stop a threat actor from using a legitimate tool. You haven't actually seen them take or use it to negative effect. But we've decided to make a bold statement here because we knew these threat actors generally operate in a malicious way, and it is important that the AI that we have is used and trusted for the right reasons. So very quickly, it's important to us that we have AI access for all. So there are principles that guide AI just in general, not just for cyber defenders. So we want to make sure that AI is enabling competition, that we're meeting our obligations under law, that we're advancing AI partnerships, and that we continue to be proactive and address constructive concerns. So as much as we innovate, we also need to make sure we have proper guardrails. We published a responsible AI transparency report in May of 24. And this one is about how we're building responsibly, how we're making decisions relating to our AI applications, and how we're supporting our customers to be able to build. The bottom line of this report is that we're all learning and growing in this space. So I kind of urge everyone to take a look. There are several key takeaways in that report. One of the biggest things that I want to highlight is that we've really evolved our governance approach over AI, so we've been working very hard for the last decade to get ready for this. But we've now moved to a place where before anything is done, we are mapping, measuring, and managing risks at every step in AI development. And we are continuing to publish transparency reports. You'll see that we published 33 notes regarding responsible AI since 2019. So, quickly, some key takeaways, because I want to make sure I leave some time for questions. I think the first thing is that given the number of threats, given the amount of information that is out there and available, it is clear that we can't do this alone. We will continue to share information. We will continue to do our best in this space, but we are going to need everyone's help. So, practically speaking, what does cyber resilience look like for national security and defense in the age of AI? The first thing is we need to use the latest innovations. Everybody in this room should be thinking about what they are doing to innovate in this space. We have to supercharge our defenses. Secondly, we really need to respond by leveraging a standard international framework for AI threats. We need to partner together. I'm committed to doing that, and I think everybody in this room is, just by merely being here. And we need to upskill, because as you noticed the whole time I was talking, I kept talking about using AI with humans, and so we need to make sure that they have the right people with the right skills. So the bottom line here is we're going to need to secure our future together. This conversation is a great place having it here at this conference. In the last 16 years, there's a history of bringing together decision makers, opinion leaders, technology experts. I urge you to use this time, especially as we have this conversation about AI. I believe that if we continue to work together, we continue to be transparent, and we continue to share information about our principles and about the threats, that we will continue to have an asymmetric advantage. And I have 5 minutes and 10 seconds for questions. Any? No.
Amy, great presentation. How's Microsoft preparing for October 18th, 2024, when NIS2 comes in active? And how can you help the global corporations that trust Microsoft to help them meet the requirements of the NIS2 October 18th deadline, and also those very, very demanding incident compliance reporting requirements like the United States Security and Exchange Commission 72-hour? How can Microsoft help your partners, and what are you doing internally?
That is a great question. And you said, how am I preparing for the NIST2 requirements? And I thought to myself, well, right now I'm preparing for EO 14028 attestation requirements. The answer is that we are preparing for requirements all around the world. The hard part, as you noted, is that there is not harmonization among those requirements. At the same time that we're preparing for NIS2, we're also preparing ourselves and helping our customers prepare for DORA in the EU as well. And so what we have done is we have what we call a Microsoft security policy document, which harmonizes all of the regulations around the world. And then we start from the highest possible baseline, and we comply in that fashion. And so at this very moment, we've taken everything that we know that is going to be implemented, and we have charted that across the world, and we're complying in that manner. To the extent that it is a customer-specific obligation where Microsoft would be relied on, like NIS2 or DORA or those things, we're working directly with our customers in order for them to be able to comply. And the interesting thing is that my team, the Cybersecurity Policy and Protection team, actually includes our cybersecurity legal and compliance team. And this week, they're all back at home getting attestations ready so that we can certify our software for the US government for EO 14028. So it's a great question. I mean, the answer is we're spending a lot of time doing it, and we're doing it with our customers as well. Question. I feel like I should just run to you.
Yeah, don't do that. Thank you very much for your comments. So just going back to the bit about how AI is being used by defenders, one of the things that we hear quite a lot about in the sort of the current and future state for defence is the pace of attack, enabled by AI or not, and therefore the pace required of defenders. Can you talk a bit about how you're approaching removing the human from the loop to adapt to that pace of defence in a risk-managed way?
So the answer is, at the very beginning, in some instances, we are using AI for initial review and where there is a high volume of information. And we are looking for, I'll give you an example. To the extent that there has been a compromise at a customer or somewhere, and we believe that there has been access to certain types of data, we are using AI to review the entire pool of data that may have been accessed to understand what was contained within the data. So does the data have credentials? Are there secrets in the data? What is the risk profile? So there's no human involved in that aspect. But there is no way that those results are going directly to anybody, because we still have a human that conducts review and makes sure that what we are sending to the customer, to someone else, is true, is accurate. So we're taking large volumes of data, using AI for review. That's cutting down on time. But we still have the human intervention on the other end for quality control and assessment at this point. I have 36 seconds. And if I can answer a question in 36 seconds, I'll do it. No? Here, I'll let you.
Amy,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.